Ernest Hemingway's Hills Like White Elephants is a pretty confusing story. The way the story is written is an example of the iceberg theory. Think of what an iceberg looks like. You only get a small amount of detail above the surface unless you dive deep enough to see more of its structure. It's almost like you have to play a guessing game to figure out what the full story truly is about. In the story, Jig and her American boyfriend are talking about an abortion. Now, they don't really say it out loud, they don't use the actual word abortion. However, there are symbols in the story to help you figure it out. For example, Jig mentions where she says that the hills look like white elephants. Now, the symbol of what white elephants truly means is something that no one wants. Metaphorically speaking, they're talking about the unborn child. She basically sees the positive side in the argument while her boyfriend does not, which is why he can't see the so-called elephants that Jig tries to point out. The main theme points out to complications, urgency, love, and manipulation. Complications and urgency because the man won't stop pressuring Jig to go through with the operation. Seems like he only cares about traveling and drinks, which is why he sounds so rushed about this whole argument itself. Love points to Jig as she does not feel loved in a relationship. Regardless if she goes through with the operation or not, she doesn't believe that anything will physically change. And finally, manipulation, because in the story when Jig asks her American boyfriend if everything will go back to normal, he immediately says yes and everything will be fine once she actually goes through the operation. Although he's only saying that to make her feel better, which is what any typical male manipulator would do, or even say in order to get out of an uncomfortable situation. Now, abortions is a pretty big issue in this day and age. It's difficult for both parties to agree when it comes to this certain topic. Abortions alone have only increased in this generation. For example, back in 2022, the monthly abortion was 82K. For 2023, it went up to 90K. And now for 2024, it went up to about 99K monthly. Now, if we're speaking percentage-wise, back in the 1920s, which is what the era looked like in the short film/story, abortions itself were pretty illegal, as it shows here. Only a small 10 to 23% of abortions were physically made, but if you look at 2024, it's skyrocketed to about 36%. Now, for abortions itself, I would say it's pretty necessary, for example, if you were to get raped. However, I feel like an abortion alone has been overused and abused over time. For example, for this generation, my generation specifically, there have been a bunch of teen pregnancies going on, and so many careless people out there who think consequences don't exist when you manage to do the deed. Like, if we're being realistic here, if you genuinely cannot afford to have a dang kid, it would make sense to not have sex in the first place. However, most of Gen Z, my generation, just can't seem to physically understand that concept. And it's gotten so horrible that everyone, like, I would say maybe 80%, is trying to normalize doing this before marriage and trying to normalize cheating and just, having a bunch of options instead of just getting with one single person. Ernest Hemingway's Hills Like White Elephants is a pretty confusing story that uses the iceberg theory to explore the topic of abortion. Jig and her American boyfriend discuss an abortion, using symbols like hills as a metaphor, and when the man used the word like it or operation. The main theme revolves around complications, urgency, love, and manipulation. The man's pressure to go through the operation is rushed, and Jig doesn't feel loved in her relationship. The story also touches on the issue of abortion, which has increased in popularity among Gen Z personally. Abortion is considered necessary for rape prevention, but it has been abused over time, with teen pregnancies and careless individuals believing consequences don't exist. The story highlights the challenges faced by Gen Z in understanding and normalizing abortions for immature and careless acts.